The music of California-based indie duo Xiu Xiu, made up of Jamie Stewart and Angela So, blends post-punk, folk, post-industrial art pop, and noise rock with brutally unparalleled lyricism that confronts uneasy topics related to trauma, gender dysphoria, shame, crime, death, sexuality, and domestic abuse, with the bone-chillingly overwrought vocal acrobatics of lead singer Jamie Stewart and the band's malleable collages of sound that are constantly changing and evolving over time. Xiu Xiu stands out as an anomaly amongst a sea of extremely safe and uninteresting indie rock bands. Xiu Xiu was first formed in San Jose, California by Jamie Stewart, Yvonne Chen, Lauren Andrews, and Corey McCulloch. The band took the name Xiu Xiu from the film Xiu Xiu the Sent Down Girl, a tragedy about a young girl who struggles to find her way home during the Cultural Revolution in the People's Republic of China. The whole theme of that movie is that there's no resolution sometimes. It goes on. Terrible shit, terrible shit, terrible shit keeps happening to this woman, and at the end she dies. And it was that rotten realness that sometimes life turns out with a worst possible case scenario. When we were putting the band together, we found that a lot of the songs were ending up like that. And so we picked that name just because it seemed to be some other reference to that idea. Life's a bitch sometimes. The idea to start the band came to Jamie Stewart soon after him and McCulloch's previous indie band 10 in the Swear Jar had disbanded. Stewart was just leaving a nightclub one night when the idea came to him to form a band that combined his love of gamelan music, Korean and Japanese folk music, goth rock, post-punk, noise, modern classical, house, and art pop. A band that combined each of these distinctive genres with writing that tackled uneasy subject matter related to personal trauma, anxieties, and injustice, crafting an identity as a band that was impossible to pigeonhole. The very first night I ever wrote and recorded a Xiu Xiu song, I'd gone to this terrible dance club in San Jose alone on Christmas night, as pathetic as that sounds, and had gotten home alone after feeble attempts to pick someone up. Xiu Xiu came from feeling stupid and lonely and then wanting to dance it away, but having the club and its music only magnify that stupid and lonely feeling. The first Xiu Xiu album, Knife Play, was recorded with an array of unorthodox instruments, including gongs, chimes, brass bells, mandolin, programmed drums, and harmonium. The album was released in 2002 on the independent Kill Rock Stars spin-off label, 5RC. The album is packed to the brim with spaced-out synths and Stewart's iconic quivering wails, punctuated by harsh blasts of electric noise.
Break into children's hospital, crying out, "Don't fuck with me! Don't fuck with me!"
The lyrics tackle parental abandonment by suicide, gender dysphoria, and paraphrased conversations that Stewart had with his students while he was working as a pre-K teacher. Knife Play was the first of many Xiu Xiu albums to masterfully explore some of the most harrowing aspects of the human condition, with layers of nuance and sensitivity that are extremely crucial to tackling these topics, chronicling mostly autobiographical subject matter that is jarring, traumatic, shocking, and extreme, but never exploitative. Part of this was inspired by one of Stewart's favorite writers, Dennis Cooper. Cooper raised my consciousness about how far you can push something. He helped me feel not necessarily that it was okay to be more open, but that it was possible to be more open. It wasn't so much that he made me feel that being open was acceptable. He served as a model for openness because he's so successful at it, at frankness. On Xiu Xiu's sophomore album, A Promise, Stewart continued his streak of ambitiously striking and over-the-top output with a sonic palette that was infused with screeching industrial synthesizers and pulsing percussion on tracks like Pink City. The album cover depicts a young man sitting naked in a hotel room, holding an upside-down baby doll. The picture on the cover came out of a chance encounter that Stewart had with a sex worker at a gay cruising spot in Hanoi, Vietnam, who he paid to come to his hotel room and pose for the picture. The album's opening track, Sad Pony Gorilla Girl, was a reworked version of a song by Stewart's former band, 10 in the Swear Jar, originally called Sad Girl. According to Stewart, the song is about a clandestine romantic relationship between a married lady and a much younger woman. A real relationship that Stewart witnessed in his old neighborhood and overheard a few of their conversations. Sad Reduxographer was another old and reworked 10 in the Swear Jar track. We had two different versions of the song. One appeared on a 5RC compilation, the label we were on, but I thought we could do a better version of it. There was this boy that I liked. I tried to get him to like me, and he thought I was stupid. And him being right that I was pretty stupid. As one does when they're in that situation, feeling pretty miserable and hopeless, a fairly typical subject matter for a sad song. The album also included a haunting, stripped-down cover of Tracy Chapman's Fast Car, which highlighted the bleak despair of Chapman's writing. For years and years, that song has just killed me. I mean, this is going to make me sound like a gigantic dick, but I swear it's true. Every time I hear that song, it makes me cry. Because of how much things are that way sometimes. You try and try and try, and shit just does not fucking work out. And you get some kind of very difficult and small idea of how you can make things better. Maybe if you fall in love with someone, or maybe if you found a different job, or maybe if you just go back to community college, or maybe if you have a baby, or maybe if you get off drugs or something will turn out okay. And sometimes it does, but a lot of times it just doesn't. The cacophonous and cathartic Apostat Commander shows Stewart grappling with suicidal ideation, with lyrics that are likely reflective of the suicide of Stewart's father, who passed around the same time that Stewart started work on the album. The album's closing track, Ian Curtis Wishlist, named after the late lead singer of the legendary post-punk band Joy Division, was meant to represent a list of things that you have convinced yourself that you want to have happen, but you know are never going to happen. The following record, Fabulous Muscles, released in 2004, embraced a much more accessible pop sound without Stewart sacrificing any of the grit or forwardness that made the first two Xiu Xiu records so fantastic. Stewart described the album as an opus of negative dominance, be it sexual, political, or emotional. With Corey McCulloch taking on production duties and Stewart inviting a myriad of guest players, they constructed a sound that was both minimalist and hard-hitting, heavily relying on synthesizers and drum machines, and lyrics that were just as intense and gut-wrenching as one would expect going into a Xiu Xiu record. On the title track, Stewart grapples with physical abuse that he suffered at the hands of an ex-partner.
Break my face and it was the kindest touch you ever gave.
And on Niece's Pieces, Stewart grimly warns his newborn niece that her life ahead of her will only bring pain and anguish, and he also expresses a deep sorrow for her having been born into a helplessly dysfunctional family with so much baggage. On Support Our Troops, Black Angels, Stewart launches into a tirade against American indifference to war, as well as his indignation at the ongoing violence in the Middle East.
You shot your grenade launcher into people's windows and into the doors of people's houses, but you wanted to shoot it into someone just to watch them blow up. Why should I care if you get killed?
Xiu Xiu's following album, La Foy, which included contributions from Devin Hoff and John Dietrich from Deerhoof, was a much more reflective return to form for Stewart, trading the harsh noise pop sensibilities on Fabulous Muscles for slow and tranquil acoustic guitar embellishments, as well as vibraphone, lush string arrangement, chimes, and clarinet. In an interview with Pitchfork, Stewart said that Le Foret was about reflection and resignation and coming to a sort of resolution. Not necessarily a positive resolution, but maybe coming to a kind of negative understanding of these things, dealing with them indirectly, meaning emotionally and intellectually, less physically. The album also included contributions from Stewart's cousin, multi-experimental instrumentalist of XXL and Cold Cave fame, Caralee McElroy, who contributed on harmonium, keys, and percussion. Caralee went on to become one of Xiu Xiu's longest-running rotating collaborators, contributing vocals and experimental instrumentation on 5 consecutive Xiu Xiu records, up until 2010's Dear God, I Hate Myself, which was the first record that did not include contributions from McElroy. The album Dear God, I Hate Myself was a collection of dissonant horror-laden new wave anthems with contributions from Deerhoof's Greg Saunier and John Dietrich, as well as Ches Smith on drum programming, and Angela So on piano, backing vocals, and synths. So is the longest-running collaborator in Xiu Xiu to date, staying on board with Stewart for all of Xiu Xiu's following records, and she remains a valuable asset to the band to this day. I have a different approach to and varying tastes in music and art than Jamie, so it's an interesting dynamic. But I've worked with Jamie long enough to understand his goals, strengths, tendencies, and aesthetic, which helps me to see what he's trying to achieve and how to push certain things to get there. In 2014, the band released one of their definitive albums, Angel Guts Red Classroom. The album was produced by John Congleton, a Grammy Award-winning producer, and the album was partially inspired by Stewart's move from small-town North Carolina to LA's MacArthur Park. The album was described in a press release as the beginning of Xiu Xiu's descent from grayness into the deepest blackness endurable, as well as, quote, the sound of Xiu Xiu's death. The production perfectly mirrors the absurdity, vulgarity, and grotesqueness with tortured, unsettling dissonance. Subject matter includes sexual assault, suicide, and an intense fear of physical harm. The frenetic drum machines and shrill synths on Stupid in the Dark have invoked similarities to Suicide's Frankie Teardrop.
He's married, he's got a kid. And he's working in a factory. But I wish I said it was.
The name of the album came from a 1979 erotic Japanese B-movie of the same name. That movie was playing in a theater the first couple of days in LA after I moved back, and I was profoundly relieved to see something I would not have had any access to in North Carolina. It was one of the most miserably debauched movies I've ever seen, and it was fantastically out in plain view. The album's sonic palette was largely inspired by New York's no-wave scene in the 80s, and acts like the German group Einstürzenden Neubauten, and classic songwriters like Scott Walker. And as many Xiu Xiu fans have come to expect, the album is pretty much the opposite of easy listening. On tracks like Archie's Fades and Botanica de Los Angeles, Jamie paints a hypothetical picture of several people that he loves dying in the most unsettling and graphic detail imaginable. In an interview that he gave with Q'd, Stewart said, "Suicide has been a big problem in my family for a while, and a lot of Xiu Xiu songs have been about that." Xiu Xiu's 2017 album, Forget, was also produced by Congleton, and described as the band's most direct engagement with pop music. Taking inspiration from the English record producer and early space-age experimental pop pioneer Joe Meek, who wrote and produced for groups like the Tornadoes, the Honeycombs, and the Rebel Rousers, Stewart explained that he was really trying to replicate Meek's early innovations. Joe Meek invented a ton of studio techniques that at the time were completely revolutionary, like close miking, echo, excessive compression on sounds. He was one of the first people to really use a studio as an instrument, but he was also a greater, almost over-the-top arranger, so I think the pop element came from him. With tracks like the choral-infused Wondering and the arpeggiating climax of Jenny Go-Go, the album is a song-based, enigmatic dream that explores the more tortured aspects of identity. Many songs on the album are purposefully ambiguous, allowing listeners to apply their own interpretations to the songs. The title track is a tremulous and painful ode to forgetting one's identity as an act of survival. And the final track, Faith Torn Apart, features a long-form poem written by Stewart that is recited by trans icon and punk pioneer Vaginal Davis. The poem is told from the perspective of a victim of online child trafficking, which was inspired by photos of underage girls that Stewart saw on the site Backpage.
My beauty mark is from a pen. My wig fell off onto the pillow. My smirk is a shadow. My glasses have purple frames. My village is 6,600 miles away.
On Xiu Xiu's 2019 album, Girl with Basket of Fruit, the band continues their streak of unpredictability by completely abandoning any ounce of noise pop sensibilities of their previous few records and purely embracing disturbing, disorienting sonic assaults with lyrics that were purely spoken word poetry. The opening title track, with all its abrasive electro-clash production, is strongly reminiscent of a Death Grips deep cut. That sounds like the experience of descending into hell. A great deal of the album explores the ugliest atrocities of modern life. In the whispered cello-driven Amarji Ve Mu, Stewart ruminates on his sister's battle with cancer and expresses the intense struggle that he feels to come to terms with it. My sister and best friend is slogging through the most boring and brutal disease. The music is from an original piece composed and played by superb bassist Devin Hoff. He titled it Amarji after the Turkish feminist activists of the same name. However, the undoubtedly most haunting track on the record is the unnerving Mary Turner, which was inspired by the woman of the same name whose husband was killed by a lynch mob. After publicly objecting to the death of her husband, Mary Turner suffered the very same fate. She was 8 months pregnant at the time. Nothing ever happened to the perpetrators, and she received not even an ounce of justice.
Fuck your guns. Fuck your war. Fuck your truck. Fuck your flag.
The name of the album was inspired by the famous Caravaggio painting, Boy with Basket of Fruit. In a track-by-track guide to the album, Stewart explained that his aim with the title was to build a world around the Caravaggio painting that highlighted the plight of women in that particular period, and the unfavorable ways that most women in Western art were depicted. Male martyrs are almost always surrounded by nurses, their mothers, adoring angels, and other loving disciples, wrapping their crushed and holy bodies in strips of herb-soaked cloth and weeping rapturously. Female martyrs are almost always depicted having their skin flayed, breasts branded, or ripped off with tongs or being stabbed, and they are always alone, save for their murderers. There is never anyone by their side celebrating their spiritual life, only fiendishly reveling in their torture. It is perilous to be a quote-unquote girl. Look at almost any paintings of girls from this era and it feels tense as it is now, and as tense as it remains. Xiu Xiu's most recent album, Oh No, released in January of this year, is an album entirely composed of duets, with a talented lineup of guests from Sharon Van Etten to Haley Ford to Liz Harris to Chelsea Wolfe to Drab Majesty's Deb Demure to Alice Bagg, all contributing their own vocal interpretations of Jamie's writing. Angela So even briefly steps back from production duties to contribute vocals to the track Fuzz Gonna Fight, and it sounds magnificent. This particular setup gives the devastating quality of Stewart's songwriting a balance of solace that is aided by community. In an interview with The Wire, Stewart expressed that making an entire album composed of duets was a way to attempt to create a symbol of appreciation for the kindness that people were showing me when I was having a particularly difficult time getting through life. Prior to this record having been made, I was fairly thoroughly fucked over by a number of friends of mine, not in related ways but just coincidentally. It caused my brain to explode in a way that made it difficult to function in life for a couple of months. But at the time, a lot of people who I had not expected to reached out. It reoriented me to the fact that not every single person in the world sucks. Duets were a symbol of that appreciation. By the time the record was being made, I had got my feet back on the ground, so it's more of a testament to having been healed than necessarily a process of healing. And being healed by the generosity of other people, which is not really how my life has ever existed. Stewart is just as blunt and forward in real life as he is in his music. In a 2003 interview he gave with Pitchfork to promote A Promise, he expressed that he can't stand most music because of how safe it sounds. Personally, any creative venture that's ever meant anything to me personally has been really over the top. Most indie rock, I think, is some of the dumbest fucking music I've ever heard, because it's usually just listless. Not even the same old stuff, but people just being very subtle and very guarded. I mean, fucking why? Why? Why indeed? Xiu Xiu has directly challenged what the public considers to be acceptable to sing about when it comes to the ills of society, pushing the boundaries of what it means to take it too far without crossing a line. The way that Jamie Stewart tackles his outward queerness, the way he essentially exercises his own soul and rips himself apart while consistently surprising listeners record after record, is no small feat. He is also an excellent collaborator and a great music appreciator, which can be seen in his many cover albums dedicated to the music of Twin Peaks and artists like Nina Simone. It's pretty obvious that the music of Xiu Xiu is definitely not for the faint of heart, and it usually veers as far as humanly possible from easy listening. Stewart has long been dismissed and slandered by critics who have accused his writing of being solipsistic, or just melodrama for melodrama's sake. But to listen to Xiu Xiu and only have this kind of takeaway would be missing the point entirely. With all the unsavory aspects of the world that his writing tackles, Stewart's tone has never ever come off as exploitative or egocentric. As Brian Howe wrote in a review, Stewart engages in a self-scrutiny so ruthless and unflinching that it surpasses mere melodrama and becomes magnetic, grotesque, and even beautiful. Their work seems less of a vehicle for vanity or narcissism than an instrument of basic survival. And I wholeheartedly agree. Xiu Xiu is the soundtrack to so many people's lives who understand the never-ending devastation that Jamie writes about incessantly, because for many people, that is what a lot of their lives look like. And it is for this reason that Xiu Xiu has one of the most devoted fan bases imaginable. The pessimism and nihilism that their music highlights is shared by many listeners, which is why the fact that this type of music even exists is such a big deal. And believe me, I'm not the only one who thinks so.